Welcome to the adventures of Self. Conversations with ordinary and extraordinary people as they explore what it means to be self-expressed. Come on in. Join the adventure.
Hello, Akello Stone. Welcome to the adventures of Self.
Hey, thank you. I'm happy to be here. I love an adventure.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. We this is kind of like take two for us. We tried last week and kind of got our signals crossed. But it's kind of nice in a way because there's this. It like really puts you in the moment of something. You know, it's like we had an opportunity. And it's like that little space there was lost. And there's a bit, maybe, I don't know, for you or for me, that I was like, oh gosh, you know, I've kind of lost that. But then it's like, oh no, but we're choosing something else. We're going to create something else. And so there was like, although that particular moment was lost, it would kind of like creates the anticipation and the opportunity for really, you know, it's like really making this is the one. This is the take.
Yes. I agree. I think it just, you know, for me at least, 5 days or whatever is like this, right? It happens that quickly, but it's just allowed me to really think about more deeply what's on my mind at this moment in time, you know, because every day does bring a different opportunity to look at things just slightly different, and things can shift and change and you're thinking in a moment's notice, and depending upon what's happened, what you've taken time to think about. So, you know, this is probably an even better day. I'm wiser, you're wiser.
we are 5 days older and wiser. Oh, collectively, that is 10 whole days of wisdom that we bring.
That's
to
a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah, so a lot can happen in 10 days.
Listener, be warned. This is you're getting an extra 10 days of collective wisdom down the audio channels. Cool. So jokes aside, or well, at least for the moment, I'm happy to have jokes. We have a lot of similarities. And I'm really happy that we made a connection. You know, I was looking at your profile, and there's things that I see you do, and I'm like, oh, I have an interest in that, or I've pursued that, or I can connect with that. And in particular, I mean, the as you say, you're up for an adventure. Like I really love the concept of adventure, because to me that is like anything, right? I mean, this conversation, going to climb a mountain, you know, being in a relationship, having a picnic with friends, like it all can be an adventure, right? It's what you bring to it. And then the other side of this podcast is around self. And you have a particular interest in self.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Probably more than most. It was not something that I've always had. It was something that I discovered along the way. A lot of times we push ourselves way back in terms of priorities of everything that we need to do on a daily basis, which is fine because selflessness is great. But then we start to lose ourselves. And when we lose ourselves, we're less equipped to be able to give ourselves to others. So it's then, in essence, making a deeper connection with oneself is a selfless act because of the benefits that others can receive. At least from my experience, I feel like I'm a more grounded person, a more patient person, because of the capacity that I built within myself to be patient with myself, which is an ongoing thing, right? But you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I was in a room on Clubhouse over the weekend, and it was around compassion. And what was interesting is that I spoke about this, and a lot of other people spoke about how compassion starts with you. starts, from ground zero. And I reflected that definitely is not how I dealt with compassion throughout most of my years. I had what I think was a selfless notion of compassion, of like, oh, I care about others, let me go help them, or be supportive, or listen, whatever it was. And I think that in the last, I don't know how long, but certainly the last few years, I've realized that unless I started with compassion for myself, I might have consideration or concern or other emotions, but a lot of things, if you don't have these things like love and compassion and understanding for yourself, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to actually truly provide that to somebody else, because then, like, I can only speak about myself, my experience, and like when I look back at the things that I did, what I thought were compassionate, I think it was my own kind of, like, I don't know if it was virtue signaling, or doing something to get some type of recognition, some type of thing back, where when I feel compassion for myself, then it's not about being perfect or being seen to do the right thing. It's just because then it just, like something flows out of me more naturally, more it's like it flows out of me rather than trying to get something come back into me.
It's interesting. You said a lot right there. So my mind was kind of saying, like, how can I synthesize, what you said, and what you think? I think you referred to is in the beginning is what I would call performative compassion, is where you go through the emotions. You go through, you have a certain emotion, and then you have a certain expression so that other people will receive that compassion. But I don't believe compassion has to be this performative act. I think compassion is something to do with the heart. And if one starts to develop compassion for themselves, at least for me, again, in my experience, is I then begin to expand that compassion for anyone who's ever hurt me, has done me wrong, has controlled me, oppressed me, manipulated me. Like, I have compassion for the experience that they probably had that caused them to displace that onto me. So then the compassion becomes to be more expansive, and it's not just like an act or a performative thing. At that point, it's an internalization of the connective struggles that we all have, and how we can, lighten our load, so to speak, by understanding the complexity of what it is that's causing us to feel a certain way. So compassion for ourselves is a lot more challenging than being angry or frustrated with oneself, right? Or judging oneself. So compassion, to me, is a counterbalances that kind of negative self-talk that most of us have going on in our heads. And the other thing that you mentioned too is there is this kind, I call it the like, it's a delusional reward expectation cycle, where we do things only motivated by getting something in return. And that's not true compassion. Compassion is that you may never get it back, but you still send it out.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of compassion, like, I sort of geek out on words sometimes, and look at etymology, and passion means suffering. It's funny because people think passion is like this desire, right? It's like, oh, I had this passionate love affair, and it does have that aspect. It's like, it does have this like drive and real vigor to it, but it's only because, as I understand, it's because it could be lost at any moment, right? And so passion actually comes from the passion of Christ, his suffering between the time when he knew that he was going to die, right? I think it was the 40 days, and he knew his time, and so the passion of Christ is a sort of famous biblical story, and so compassion actually means to be with suffering. So like we're actually, it's like that kind of holding space, bearing witness, listening, just being with something, being with the suffering that we all can go through. But you were speaking about that all those negative, the kind of drowning, kind of negative voices. I mean, why, why do you think those are so compelling? Why are they so like loud and?
Well, this is where I have to jump into kind of the idea of cognitive development and pairing that with socialization. And through our development, everything that we understand and about the world, about ourselves, about other people, about everything comes from someone else, someone else's voice. So it's an external voice that then becomes internalized, but then it still remains as a voice as we grow and develop and become, the people that we are, and have the capacity to understand the world and, new experiences, if you will, and no longer have to have kind of be handheld. There's still a kind of a root of those external voices that remains, and not everybody's has had positive supportive voices in their development. Even if they become adults and start doing the self work towards actualization, you have years, if not decades, of a lot of negative talk that perhaps, as a child, you cannot get away from that environment. As an adult, we can end a relationship or but as a child, you are pretty much trapped in that dynamic of ideas being put into your head. So then when you move out of that, then you've got a couple decades to work to be able to free yourself from that, because it is part of the developmental process to have those external voices. But then when we start creating those that were not there, we're just repeating the behavior, repeating those not behavior, but repeating those experiences again and again. Like we tend to repeat things over and over again because they become so ingrained. It's like, the grooves in a record. The record is still going to play the same song. So we have to learn to create new grooves within our records in order to change that internal.
Because I guess, on that cognitive basis, like we've learned a particular way of thinking or being. And so when you learn that at like a precognitive level, or, you're learning things pre-language, not pre-experience, but certainly pre-language, right? So as an infant, it's like we don't start making decisions when we're 8 or 18, right? We're making decisions when we're a day old, or maybe even when we're conceived and in the womb. I don't know, but certainly the infant, as it's having whatever experience it is at a day old, 6 months old, is making some decisions or determinations. Now, it'd be hard to say that those are rational language-based decisions because those are learned traits, but there is some emotional sense there, and whatever it's receiving from its external environment is deeply shaping that. And so I think what you're saying is like the grooves that get created, if we learn something from our primary caregivers, mother, father, or whoever that is, right, that raised us, then that's kind of the basis on which we start to make our own decisions. Yeah,
absolutely. That is the foundation for that. Absolutely. What we observe, but it's kind of going back a little bit more in time. And when you're talking about infants and choices, and it's kind of a rudimentary thing, is this like, I like this, I don't like that, right? It's making those kind of polarized discernments. And then you have, if you're familiar with Freud and the id demands satisfaction, right? And how we can see the babies as being all id. They scream when they want something. They want that need to be satisfied, and as we develop, we learn that we cannot have our needs satisfied immediately. It may take much longer, or it may never be satisfied, or it may be an irrational need. It's not really a need, it's a want, it's a desire, and it can be destructive or harmful. See, that's when it just gets more and more complicated. But those foundation ways of which we experience the world, interpret the world, and whether we get what we want when we want it, I think that has a lasting impact on the temperament that we have as we move through the world as adults.
Yeah, and I was thinking, because it reminded me as we were speaking, I read, I think in a book somewhere, that there was a psychological or sociological experiment done, I think probably back in the 70s or maybe the 80s, where researchers, they attached like video recording devices to children somehow. I don't know how, but particularly sort of like sub 5-year-old, right? Sort of 3 and 4-year-olds, I think in particular. And what they discovered was that something like 80 or 85% of what they received was either no or what they were doing wrong, right? Like how, whatever the percentage was, it was just like this overwhelming sense that, it's not to say that people, children aren't encouraged for what they're doing, but a lot, right? Because there's a lot of things in the external environment, right? It's like, don't touch the stove, don't put your hand in the dog, in the new dog's mouth, don't run into the street. Like all that's very, very useful, right? It's not like these are monster parents, right? It's like there's a lot that a child needs to know in terms of socializing, but the point of it was that the overwhelming extent to which that's done, and that kind of then is reinforced. I mean, like I think it went into how our educational system and the system, the culture we live in now, like does kind of, it tells you what's right and what's wrong. Whereas we haven't, we don't really have culture that as a grand thing that gives us the tools to determine whether something is right or wrong, right? It's kind of primarily imposed upon us from external structures.
Well, there's a whole school of thought around moral development in different stages of moral development, and a lot of times people are unaware of those stages, or the idea of flirting with the theoretical notion of those stages of development. But I believe that up to a certain age, children do not have a moral consciousness. Like, as you said, it comes from the culture, it comes from the context of time, all the socio-demographic factors that impact what we see as right or wrong. But when you kind of going back to the experiment that you talked about, is, negative sanctions tend to be predominate more, right? Like, for example, as an adult, if I go over the speed limit and get caught, I get a ticket. I have to pay for a ticket, right? But at the end, if I haven't gotten a ticket an entire year, I am not paid for that. So there's no positive sanctions. In the case of children, kind of part of the idea, I think it stems from, if you believe in evolution and the development of the reptilian brain and, nurturing offspring and reproductive imperatives and things, there's almost like a knee-jerk reaction to help infants of that age and children of all ages really to avoid any risk of harm or death, that being the number one priority. So usually the best way to do that is, however you're punished, or however you're screamed at, or that kind of shocking thing that is a way that in which we feel is the quickest, most extreme way to get the point across. Because you wouldn't be like, hey, don't touch the stove, because if they're about to get burned, it's like fight or flight kind of situation. So there's a kind of back to our roots. We can strip away all the complexities of our society, but ultimately, we have we want to survive, and we want our offspring to survive by avoiding harmful, potentially dangerous things in the world.
So I feel like we're getting into a very heady space, which is very cool, but also I kind of want to drop us into a heart and a bit more exploratory space. And I want to bring in, because you've written a book, which is kind of what I started to say, that ties us together in a way, because it's about self, right? So selfdom in the age of selfies, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Seeking selfdom in the age of selfies. I use the word selfdom because I think the self is part of selfdom.
Okay.
But just a part of it. Like selfdom is, I think of selfdom in a way like a kingdom. right?
Mm.
So it's much more than just you as an individual, but selfdom is
Mm.
like, how did you come to be, and the interactivity of you in the world, and
Mm.
all the aspects of who we are, our religion, our identity, without going into those deeply. It's an acknowledgement of the complexity of who we are as people that goes beyond just me as an individual,
Mm.
so that's kind of the selfdom.
And so what brought you to seeking selfdom? How's the search going? Is it complete?
Oh no. It is not. I wish it was. The book is done.
Spoiler alert,
Was,
there's no happily ever after. Does
think,
it say to be continued?
to be continued into the afterlife, if there is one. But to think that we could actually find ourselves, and again, I try to be an intentional person. So why I chose, I'm a word guy too. I look up words all the time just to make sure I really understand them, and how do they fit together, and how do people interpret them or perceive them, and how do I, and what they really are, and that's like a conversation in and of itself. But the word seeking is different than finding. Seeking is a perpetual, persistent act. And again, in my interpretation, and finding is you actually arrive at that grand goal that you have. And I don't think that you will ever arrive, and I don't think that you should, because like we said in the beginning, every day is a new day, a new opportunity to see something differently. So if you thought, okay, I found myself, here I am, and then here comes Tuesday, and you're like, wait a second, I'm a little bit different now than I was Monday. I guess I'll just continue seeking then.
Yeah, cool. And what well, so I mean, I'm just curious, like talk me through sort of the process that brought you, because I know when we spoke initially, you said it was quite a task, quite a search, quite an internal seeking that, in spilling out into words on a page.
Yeah. It's not like some people are very linear. I mean, I have academic training. I know how to build an outline that's structured and kind of fill in the pieces, right? So I wanted to take what I call the artist's approach. Like, I see a difference between an artist's approach to something and a technician's approach, and sometimes artists are very technical, right? And sometimes technical people have very artistic ways. And so I wanted to relieve myself of the academic rigidity, the footnotes and the research and all that. Because I'm familiar with that. I know how to write in that way. I don't think it's accessible to the average person when it's overly academic, but I think that people need a little bit of that. But I just had a collection of writings for years. I collect Google Docs of this idea and that idea, and then I had got along the way. I just gotten fed up with Facebook, and I felt like I had reached my tipping point of social media. I understand what it does, and it's not for me. So I downloaded everything that I had ever posted on Facebook for a number of years, and I went through all my posts, and I pulled as many gems as I could, because there's an astounding amount of knowledge that takes place in these small bites. I'm like, how could I add this and piece this together? And then I kind of sat down with everything and just started writing, and then ideas came, and then I started, moving things around. So there was no intentionality in the writing. I think it started out with like this article. I was writing an article, but I said I should write a book instead of all these little articles. But it was finding calm in the chaos, because in the chaos, being a lot of times people hear chaos, they think about the world, and of course the world is chaotic. But I was more thinking about my mind, my overly active mind, causing my own chaos. And I didn't know what to do about it. So I figured if I wrote about it, it would help untangle some of that debris. And, just, it's kind of like when you clean your closet out and then you open your closet, and it's just so good. And, like, how can I? So I cleaned the closet of my mind of ideas out, and just like let it flow without being judgmental of it. The editing process is the killer, right? The writing is good, but the editing and the cohesion is the challenge. but it has to happen, so people understand it. But it was like freeing. It's like let's say someone who writes a journal every day, which I don't have the discipline to do, but in the same sense, I understood the cathartic process that happens when you start taking yourself down into internal, deeper than you've ever gone before within yourself.
Yeah, what really stuck to me, I mean, there's quite a few things there. Well, first of all, I mean, it just feels like the title, like, so, oftentimes when you hear that somebody's written a book and you see a titled book, it can feel like this is, it's a bit sort of like advice, or not necessarily advice, but it's like, it's something, it's for others. And I think often, like, what I get from that is how much of a personal process that was for you. It's like, you were in a way seeking your own selfdom in that process.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I was seeking my own selfdom, number one. And number two, like, the impetus for the book really wasn't, let me write this book and sell it and blah, I mean, that's fine when people do. That wasn't it. I said I wanted to write the book for me first. And usually the things that we share about ourselves and about our own journeys and adventures, right, if you will, are helpful to other people, but we can't determine what's going to be helpful, or if they need that. Maybe someone doesn't need that particular thing. So how can I try to reach everybody in every corner of what I think about? There's got to be something in there for someone else. But secondly, I wanted to, which I actually did. I actually mailed out 200 copies to people that I know, people that I've known along the way, from the past, and people who've mentored me. And I wanted them to have a physical piece of me, because I felt like I never really shared the totality of who I was with other people, because I didn't really know and acknowledge the totality of who I was. And this was my opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it's really nice to have this, like, physical, as you say, like a physical, because we're so digital and like everything is, like, well, here's a memory and then it's just gone. And to actually have a physical representation of somebody. I think what else really struck me as you were speaking was this sense of, like, going back through all these old social media, Facebook posts. And I just wonder, because it sounded like what you were saying, like you get a real glimpse of, you might think it's like, oh, hey, Bob, or whatever, you say, like, oh, that's a funny outfit, or, ha ha ha, we had a great time here. And there are probably quite a few sort of throwaway comments and things, but there are these other things that really, they show much more than one would imagine, from the surface. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not one of those people who's just like condemning social media. And I know it's like TV. There's a lot of crap. There's a lot of BS that I don't want any parts of, right? But there are moments when you read something where someone really is putting a message out there that's important, that maybe is vulnerable. They're sharing some vulnerabilities. They're sharing some very personal opinions and beliefs and values. And when you put yourself out there like that, it means that that's what you really care about. That's really what's meaningful for you. So for the most part, when I go on social media, I will want to put a message out there. It could be lighthearted, right? But I don't want to just put some BS and add to the noise, right? So, and a lot of times I call it a litmus test to see. And again, the book was a litmus test, to be honest with you. I wanted to see, at this point in my life, the people that I know. Of course, I don't have, everyday interactions with all the people that I know. You know how there's different levels of it. But I wanted to know, like, okay, so who is ideologically in alignment with me at this point in my life? Because we lose people along the way. We grow in different directions, right? But we hold on to them because we just have this history of this relationship, and then you have friendships that lasted decades, and you get to a point where, like, well, what do we have left in common now? I mean, we used to drink and party or whatever, and it was fun. So what do we have in common? And when there's no more a commonality, then we have to think about whether or not that relationship is even helpful to either one of us, so like putting it out there like that. And I think for many people, and maybe they don't realize that they are, when they're reaching out with their messages, they want to see where those ideological connections are. They're not just putting, not everyone's putting it out there just to put something out there, but they just really want to see, like, who are my people, who thinks the way that I do, because that's really who you want to surround yourself with, people who are in alignment. Now, it doesn't mean they have to be actualized to this certain different point, right? But they want to get on the ride with you.
Yeah, I mean, it to me, that goes to the sense of adventure that we go on, right? Because when you think of adventures, right, they're often, these kind of mythic tales where somebody goes off on a quest. So it's a seeking, and they have their allies. They go with their friends, or they meet friends or new allies along the way. It is really interesting, like, that what you speak about, because there are these. I did a bit of a purge recently on Facebook, particularly around photographs, and I went through and like took off a lot of photographs that like you used to put up albums. We used to like curate albums of things, and I just decided to go on and take those off, and it was really, it was quite bittersweet, because there was this moment I could kind of go back and see, oh, where was I 2 years or 8 or 12 years ago? And that's, even relatively speaking, for us, I think we're about the same age. Like, it's a good portion, but it's not kind of the totality of life by any measure. And so, like I noticed there were like, people, I was like, oh wow, like this person and I, like, we had a relationship, or we used to have a really strong connection, and that's not there anymore. And it's like kind of it kind of takes me back to what we were talking about in the beginning, like missing our first opportunity, or not sort of crossing signals, and how there's this loss that comes with that, but also like, there's an appreciation. I mean, I actually wrote to a couple of people that I kind of came across and said, gosh, we haven't talked for 8 years. And I like, it wasn't about rekindling like a connection or anything like that. It was like, wow, I just really want to thank you, for the connection that we had. Like, it was really, really special. I hope you're well. And leave it at that. And because I think it gets to, I've been thinking about things like in the last like year or so, because I think we're at like whatever it is, like a year of lockdowns and and all this kind of craziness. And when I do have the opportunity to see people or connect with somebody, whether it's face to face or online or on the phone, and I really, really appreciate it. It means, and I think we definitely had lost that, right? Where it's just like, oh yeah, let's just kind of we'll see you sometime later or whatever. And I really focus on, when I speak to family members or close friends, or even somebody I don't know very well, I really focus on the importance of, this moment.
Let me ask you, because I'm a little bit of a different person. I hate going through old photos. I hate taking that trip down memory lane. I don't find it useful for me. I trust that if a relationship has faded away into the abyss for whatever reason, and it's not like we're done, we're over. It doesn't work like that as an adult. Just greater space happens. It doesn't, in greater space. And then, in my case, there are many people who've moved away, and I've moved away. I lived in, several different states and regions. And I did that in a way so that I could grow, but I also knew I would be leaving people behind, and, whatever relationships remained in whatever form, we'll let it be as that. And I know people who constantly are going through having a TBT moment. And to me, it's just really, it's not helpful for me. It's actually harmful for me, because I feel like, okay, wait a second, you're right here in this present. Where are you going? come on back to this moment right now. But I will tell you, and it's interesting because when the pandemic happened and things started to shift and people were stuck in their houses. Of me, I've worked from home for years, at least even part-time. I've worked from home part-time for 12 years, but I've always had space, and I've always done well by myself. I love to be around other people, but I need more alone time than most people. And all of a sudden people were hitting me up and like calling from out of the blue, and I hadn't talked to them in months or years. And I'm just like, okay, wait a second. So it was almost like a desperation to reach out to people. And, it was cool and everything. And again, like you said, I'm glad that you said that too. If I did make touch with them and then we connected, it was like, hey, good to see you, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't like, let's continue to, let's rebuild what we had, because our lives are always changing, right? And so a lot of times that relationship or that part of your life is pretty much, it's over, but whatever you gain from that remains with you and it manifests in your everyday. So it's never lost. But going back to it, then you start to think about, when I go back too far, then I start to think about all the missteps and where I could have been, and you know what I mean? And like, that's like non-productive for me.
No, that is, I definitely hear you on that respect. I have had a dysfunctional relationship with the past in the past. So thank you for bringing me back to the present. It's interesting. And I think, everybody deals with things in their own way, his or her own way.
Yes.
And I have had, personally for me, I've had experiences where I definitely, I focused on like, oh, this was so good, or this was so tragic in the past, and let me dwell in that. And as I said, that definitely did not serve me. It was dysfunctional. I think this this particular thing was just, oh, here's an opportunity. Like, it's not something I really scheduled. It kind of happened as I was kind of doing this clearing. But it's interesting because it does bring up a few things. I've also traveled a lot. I've traveled. I've lived on 3 continents, 4 or 5 different countries. Like, lived all over the U.S. And when I was years ago, before I moved to London, I was living in the south of France, and I had carried a bunch of things around with me. But basically, when my father died, I had inherited a lot of his stuff, which now is over 20 years ago. And with my job, I ended up being able to take them to New York, then to Tokyo, then to England, then to France. And I had this beautiful moment, just to your point, because I think I am by nature a bit of a sort of romantic kind of maudlin. It's like, oh, there's somebody who's like, you kind of hold on to something, right? Because it gives you a sense of, maybe it gives me a sense of self, right? And I see how I inherited that from my mother. Whether it's through genetics or socialization. My mother is very, very tied to her past. There's a lot of pictures of grandparents and things that are there, and it's beautiful in its own respect. But I definitely developed or created that for myself, and but I realized, I remember, realizing even in my 20s, like, God, this is really not very helpful. I would spend so much time in regret, like, oh, this could have been like this, or this other thing could have been like this. And so I really worked, through my own development and seeking to be in the present. It's like, okay, past is the past. That's cool. Like, not to just throw it away and burn all bridges, but it is over. And when I was living in the south of France, it coincided, I got divorced. It was a very tumultuous time, about 15 years ago, right before I moved back to London. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a place to live. I'd just broken up with somebody. It was like, oh my God, what's going on?
That's a lot.
Yeah. And I went through a massive purge. I had all these belongings, books and furniture and whatever, all this stuff, CDs and everything. And I remember I had a sort of policy. I would look at something and I said, have I used this in the last year? And if not, then I'm getting rid of it.
Yeah.
And I gave away hundreds of books that I was carrying around. God, I mean, I hadn't read half of them, but they looked good. They looked good in a bookshelf.
Sure.
And I did this, with a lot of things. Like all the furniture I had was pretty much all I'd inherited from my father, and I felt like I was really carrying that around. And so I went through this like quite cathartic sense where I didn't give away everything I had, but I'd say about 90% of my belongings I gave away or sold or did whatever. And it was really interesting because there was a very freeing aspect to it. There was this like, oh, great, I've kind of let go of all this. And then there were these moments, for weeks and months, and then oftentimes even years to come, where something would come into my mind and I would think like, oh, let me go wear that shirt for this occasion, or get this CD to listen to, or whatever. And the realization would come, oh, I don't have that anymore. And there was a moment of sadness, but because I had made the choice,
yes,
whether I'd been in my right mind or not. I mean, I was kind of in a difficult moment then, and sort of like, let me just burn it all. But but it really helped me say, okay, well, that things had its time. It actually was one of the like looking back on it, that decision and that process was one of the most because it was a long-term process. I mean, so we were talking about like the seeking of selfdom, right? It's not an overnight thing. And it brought me into a deeper realization of what life is, and my connection to a lot of work I do now, in personally and with clients or whatever, is around what's happening in the world, right? Like if you look outside, nature, like it doesn't stop, right? It's just every day, boom, boom, sun's coming up, doing something else. Trees are blooming, trees are dying, birds are singing, other animals, it's like, it's just like, it's always going. And so I got this deeper appreciation. It's like, well, there's something here. And then sometimes it's okay to let that go, and to then allow, because when you let something go, it gives space for something new to emerge.
Absolutely. But I also don't think that you necessarily have to have the expectation that something new will emerge. I think that I think we need more space. I think we need more space, both figuratively and literally. I think that a very sparsely furnished room feels better to me than, and a lot of people have a lot of things. I get it. They have an attachment to things. That's part of the capitalist cycle. But like as my minimalist, I strive for minimalism. It doesn't mean I have nothing, right? But it means that, for example, when you were talking about physical items that are connected to a person who is no longer here or no longer part of your life, right? But you want some memento to have a physical aspect, like we're talking about the book, a physical aspect that reminds you of them, right? So that person is one person, right? Right? And that's one person that was here and is no longer here, but you have 57 different physical manifestations of them. So imagine that if you looked around the room and you had physical manifestations, 57 manifestations, and all of those manifestations represent that person, and that person appeared 57 times, it would be chaotic. And then the other thing is, if you have 57 items, they would not hold the same amount of value as if you only had one. So I have one thing from each person. Usually it's a gift. Usually I love when people give me a piece of art, and I'll keep that, and I don't need anything else. But one piece, both of my parents are deceased. I have one physical item from each of them and that's it. There's some photos and stuff that's different, right? But I don't put them up. They're in a box for, someday someone might want them. I don't know, but the one physical item, and isn't enough. It's enough to maintain a momentary memory of that person, that they still remain. But anything besides that is redundant, and a lot of times the things that we have accumulated could be helpful for someone who doesn't have these things. I know I've gotten things from thrift stores and bought off Craigslist and things that someone was trying to get rid of, but then I had a need for it. And then when I no longer had a need for it, if it's still in good condition, I give it away, I sell it. It's broken, I throw it away, kind of do the Marie Kondo thing. And it's a long process, but you have to do it you have to do a little bit every day, and you will get there.
Yeah. No, I definitely appreciate that. That's a nice way of thinking about that, kind of like the one item per person, because as you were saying, like, the 57 items, right, becomes chaotic. And the other thing it reduces, it's like, well, then there's just 50 things about the person, 57 things about the person.
Exactly.
So it kind of does two things, right? One, it kind of like disperses all the energy, and you're like, oh, there's this thing, there's that thing, there's where if it's just one thing, then it's like all the energy goes into
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, I'd be like, what if someone had like, a wedding ring on each hand? Right? No, they have one wedding ring. Why don't they have, well, you got 10 fingers. Oh, you don't love me 10 times as much? No. Yeah, because of the power of that the material symbolism in that. So, and I think if a person put their head around that, you still retain the person, you still retain that aspect of the person. That person that's gone, especially if they're dead, they do not care what you do with the things that they had, the worldly possessions. They do not care. Throw it away. My philosophy is throw it all away when I go. I don't care. It's just material things. It doesn't mean anything.
Cool. I want to shift, sort of like do a hard right turn into puppetry.
Oh, okay.
Because the thing is, like, there's so many things that I would love to talk to you about. Because and there's so many things I look at, like what you're doing, your creative expression, the book, and I just feel like, let's tell me about puppetry.
Wow. It's almost like, where do I begin with puppetry? And I mean, could go back. I'm a child at heart. And if you think about it, puppets are introduced to children in a way, like puppets. They use puppets in therapy to allow children to express something that they could not express, from themselves, or have a puppet that interacts with a child the way that children interact with puppets. I've always found fascination with that. I grew up watching Mr. Rogers and Captain Kangaroo and Sesame Street and all of that. So I've always had a fascination with puppets. I saw Avenue Q at the theater, and I was just like, I have a fascination with puppets. Damn it. How come I'm not trying this out, right? Long story short, I wrote this short film, and it was about it was about a dating service for ventriloquists. Because in my mind, I was like, I wonder what that's like. You're a ventriloquist. They can be very tied to their puppets, names, personas. It becomes so much a part of who they are. So it was kind of a date. It's called Double Date, and so ventriloquists bring their puppets on the date. Anyways, I just, life happens. It just didn't happen. I was gonna happen, and it just didn't happen. It usually comes down to this: money and time, right, to do it the right way. So I abandoned that, and then I had another idea all of a sudden. What about, like, I like puppets that are used to express adult angst in a way that's palatable for adults, because we all as adults grew up on puppets, but then we become adults and they can't watch puppets anymore because they don't talk about anything we're interested in, but we do like to watch them, right? And so 13 Puppets, did this whole web series, 6 months of work, filmed in my garage, got voice actors and all that. And then I joined a puppetry improv group. That just was a new class. I was like, puppets. I was doing improv. I was like, puppet improv. Well, this could be fun. And so that was a fun part of the kind of journey, right? The adventure of puppeting. So what I found out along the way is, because I do commercial acting, but in terms of like theatrical performance and theatrical dialogue and playing a character, unless it's like a zombie or something like that, it just doesn't, I don't feel comfortable and fluid in playing a completely different character. It's like a psychological mind, you know, it messes with my mind psychologically. However, if I have a puppet and that puppet can be a completely different character, it's and so I've learned, okay, so there's something about externalizing a character and a dialogue and an accent and this whole thing with a puppet that I have a challenge doing as a person, and I find that really an interesting outcome.
You know, I've heard that, and it just reminds me because I had a hand puppet that used to show up at a friend bought this puppet years ago and started bringing it out to parties, and we would go to festivals. And this puppet is called Henry, and he would show up, and I kind of became his owner. Like other people kind of tried, but he eventually just kind of I came to me, and I looked after I looked after him. He was quite racy, rude, and I actually because I remember I had a friend, like a mentor back in my 20s who did puppets and storytelling. And I don't know, he was probably about my age now that I think back, but like the end, back then I was like, oh, this is an old man. You know, when 20-year-olds, you're like 50, wow, that's an old man.
Woo, grandpa.
Yeah, exactly. And here we are.
Yes.
But I remember him telling me like how much of almost literally a separate character this is. And I actually felt, you know, because I would take him out like to parties and, as I say, to festivals, and it literally felt. I mean, here was this thing that was like a, you know, hand sock puppet on my hand. I was speaking it. I mean, but it truly felt to me as if it were a separate entity, and people would say, oh, you're just doing this, you're acting this, you're thing, and I would think, yeah, I guess I am, but it doesn't actually feel like that. It literally feels like something else has, like there's another presence that's kind of come through me. That probably sounds like quite weird now describing this, but I know that like I've heard, you know, puppeteers like talk about this, that it, you know, it takes on a separate I don't know, psychology or presence in the world. Am I crazy? Maybe so.
You are not
right?
crazy. You're absolutely right, and I find it fascinating. And I just actually recently purchased another puppet. I basically had the 13 puppets. I bartered. I got rid of 11 of them. I bartered with the improv school to get a commercial acting class, and I would give them the puppets because I was like, I don't need these puppets anymore. I'm done with that. It was fun. I'm going to keep a couple. I actually gave another puppet away. I was helping a young actor who'd never done puppeting, and he's brilliant. And I guess I'd take this puppet, play around with it, you know, that's a good acting skill to have. But I bought this monkey puppet. It's like a Japanese monkey. I had this idea because I said, I need to build a little bit stronger demo reel, you know, for the puppets. So I said, let me get a puppet and I'll fabricate kind of a children's show that could be fun and teach them about, I wanted to do a lesson about moderation. Which I think that is, you know, you don't want to wait too late to teach moderation, right? And I could use this puppet. So when I got this puppet out and I started to, you know, figure out how he works, the way in which he physically works, the expressions that he can have, how his arms move, what his body is like, all helps me psychologically build a character for this puppet. So it's not just, I'm going to build this character and then impose it upon the puppet. Once you get that puppet, there's something that happens. I'm a person that talks with my hands a lot. So I feel like it's almost kind of a natural thing for me to be able to use a puppet. But then when you're talking to the puppet that's on your hand, even though it's you, that puppet can become the receiver of your dialogue, and you can actually have a dialogue with a puppet, whereas but it is something in our heads, but we don't really vocalize it, right? And this allows us to have a physical manifestation of some internal dialogue that we may or may not be dealing with, and also the recreation of the characters of people that we've met along the way and have dealt with. They go into that, and part of us goes into that. And it's really, it's not a childish thing at all. It is a very cathartic process, I think, to puppet.
Yeah, I'm listening to you. There's a part of me that feels like it definitely sounds like we're crazy. And so what I would, what I would suggest anybody listening is make your own puppet, get a puppet, and have a conversation. I think it's really, and I think it goes to something around just general creativity, because I look at a lot of what you do, and you're very creative. You're a very creative guy. Like you say, you've got this academic side. You're a professor. You teach sociology, and so you can kind of do that, like left brain, rational, structured way of doing things, and there's a deep appreciation and exploration, seeking, adventure side of you that looks to explore that creative expression. And one thing as a prompt that I'd like to get you to speak about is the maybe the challenge that comes up with that, because I think a lot of people, when they think about creative expression, they look at things on whatever, on YouTube or Instagram or stage or anything, and they're like, oh well, I could never do that because I'm just whatever, plain Jane or Joe Schmo or whatever, very, very, very plain words. But I recognize in myself, there were I was very interested in artistic expression at sort of in teens and 20s, and I ran up against a lot of brick walls, and I felt like that. Okay, well, that's clear that I don't have this, and so I abandoned. And went into a very left brain, field in the corporate world for 15, nearly 20 years, until I kind of started to come back to my own creative expression. And now I don't have a clue half the stuff of what I'm doing, but it's about having that there's an idea, and then just seeing what happens with that, right? Not about this has got to win a Grammy or get 5,000 likes. Because it actually comes from, because actually if I do something that I don't particularly enjoy, and everybody kind of claps and says this is amazing, I think, okay, well, I'm glad you enjoy it, but it doesn't really actually do that much for me. Whereas when I do something for me, and even if 0 people enjoy it, I'm like, well, I enjoyed it. I had a good time. So there you go. Yeah, I mean, so I'm just curious to hear your experience in that, because I know you also mentor and help people with this.
You know what? I'm going to go back to what you said when you talked about passion, and I was really, the wheels really got turning, because I never really took too much time to dig deep into passion and what it means. I know there's various definitions. I address passion in the book because I see it as a fire that burns. But when you put it that way, I think you've really helped me understand the nature of my creativity. It's because if I don't express myself in certain ways, I will be suffering. And so unlike yourself, who abandoned, let's say, right brain activities for a long period of time and then have returned to them, which a lot of people do, I refuse to completely abandon that part, and they've coexisted, which, they coexisted. Sometimes there's intersection between the two, but oftentimes it's just the need to do that to avoid the feeling of, what could I do, right? And then when I do, and and it doesn't mean I do everything well or that I stick with it long enough. There's one, I'm doing hand drums, and I'm doing the ukulele, and then I'm doing some gardening, and then I'm like this is my garage. I spent 7 weeks back here, like 10 hours a day, renovating it into a usable space because I knew I could, and I wasn't trying to do it. Like when you do something for somebody, it takes on a different tone. Like if I do photography, right? I like to do photography when I offer it freely and it's about what I want to take pictures of. But when someone pays you to do something and then they take over the process, then it's no longer my expression. Then I'm just a technician, right? Like editing videos. If I'm editing someone else's videos, I'm merely a technician who's putting the work in to achieve what they want. But if I'm editing something that I filmed, it's a completely different process and experience for me. So I think I've always had a fear of having my livelihood be overly connected to something I actually like to do. Because people say, if you love to do it, you can make a living out of it. But I was like, never that easy. Because the things that I love to do, I think the joy I get from them would be destroyed if I was dependent upon that to earn a living. It truly would.
Yeah, really, really interesting. That what do I want to? Yeah, I mean, I think that like there is this in the creative expression. It's always a seeking. For me, like, this podcast, right? I haven't done it to get money or do anything else. I did it because I felt that this is what and so I get that sense. It's like, I also, what I wanted to say was your process of having that as a kind of constant thing, like that's a real, I really honor and acknowledge you in that. And if anybody young is listening to this, like, please go out and explore all sides of you, because I think what happened for me is there was a lot of artistic expression inside that was frustrated, right? That I wasn't letting out. So that the passion, the fire was still there, but I had gone through a point in my own life development where I had, I got to a point where I believed I didn't have anything to say. And I don't know if I have anything to say. I mean, but there was something still kind of burning. And it's like the energy, it's like if you don't provide a particular outlet or channel for it, right, it'll find something else to do. And often it gets twisted, perverted, or frustrated, right? Because it wants, the heart wants to express itself in a particular way. I think it goes back to, like children, we were talking about with children, right? It's like, when you watch children play, right? If you go to a park and watch 2 or 3 children that have never met each other, they will come up with a game, and they will decide what people are going to do, and they'll just do it. They're not going to say, well, sorry, I haven't been trained as a train. I don't know how to be a train conductor, right, or how to be a ballerina. They'll just be like, okay, fine, I'm the ballerina, or I'm the train, I'm the lizard, or whatever it is, and they'll just do that. And I think that what I like about some of the things you've talked about is there have been things that you had an interest. So it's like nobody told you or taught you about puppetry. It's like something came to you, and you're like, oh, let me go see what that does, and maybe do it for a few weeks, few months, few years, maybe for a few hours, and you're like, okay, cool, I'm done with that. Or I've done enough. And maybe there's something else, like whether it's like, playing the drums or acting, that you're like, oh, this I really want to, continue and sink my teeth into and get more into.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you've got to try as many things as you can while you're here, because you will be amazed at what you learn you do like and what you don't like. Okay, for example, I said I love the Great British Baking Show, obsessed with it, saw every season. I don't know why. I can't explain why. I think there's this kind of just the love that I have of everyday people, and to see people be so devoted to one thing, which I've never been devoted to one thing. I'm all over the place, but that they've really become an expert at that. And I like to marvel at that in a vicarious way. So I was like, you know what, damn it, I'm going to learn to make muffins from scratch. Got a muffin pan, got a recipe. I was doing like some banana chocolate chip muffins. I was doing some pumpkin chocolate chip, got to have the chocolate chips. And, and I would find myself, and I bake a dozen of them. And then I was like, okay, this is too many muffins, and trying to give them away. And then it was like, okay, I guess I could do that. I didn't like the process. There was nothing that said, oh, like you put it in the oven and then there's nothing happening anymore. And so people that, I don't like measuring. I don't like reading ingredients. You see, that's the part that's there's a very technical aspect to baking. It's incredibly technical. It's not just throwing, I'm a barbecuer. Slap some stuff on and put it on the barbecue. It doesn't need, there's not that like measuring and all that and process. I do like process. It's funny. I like process in the, left brain, or the logical side of the brain. I love process, but anything that's like expressive and artistic, I just want it to be as it is. So when I for example, like when I'm editing something, I don't do it sequentially. I'm just like, oh, let me cut this, let me put this sound in, let me move this transition. Haven't even looked at the whole thing and I'm already cutting it up. So because no one's looking after me saying you should do it a certain way. And this kind of leads me to the point where so much of our lives is restricted by rigid rules and protocols and ways of doing things. And then we learn how to do them, and we do them over and over and over and over again. And then there's nothing new. There's nothing random. I call that stagnation. And it can happen to anybody. You can get out of it, but like stagnation prevents you from growing. It prevents you from finding, feeling passion. And a lot of people just put it all away until they retire, and then they kind of reconnect with it. And I think life is too short. I think you have to continually balance some things out to handle the responsibilities and the things that you have to do that are imposed from someone else, but take some lead on things that you want to do for yourself. You should not just be working and then coming home and watching TV, for example. I love TV. I like to consume, right? But you've got to carve some time out to create, no matter what it is, even if it's creating a vision board, cutting things out of magazines, or, you will find it. You keep trying things, you will find it. There's so many things that I've tried that I absolutely hated. I tried knitting, absolutely hated it. Never would. I tried it because someone offered it to me to try. And I was like, well, I can't say I don't like it if I've never tried it. And I was like, I really don't like this, but thank you for showing me. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah. Awesome. It's really, really nice to hear the expanse, the expanse of opportunity in that. Cool. I think we've covered a lot. I think we could probably go on for a while, but we've really covered a lot here today. I just there's one thing I did want to ask before we go, because I had this sense before we started, and I kept having this thing. It's like, this is, quote unquote, like my show, my host, but I know that like you are a host, like you really like to host things. So I, even like for the last minute or so, I'd love to just kind of like hand the mantle over and be like, okay, Akello, you're the host now, because at some point you even said like, well, let me ask you a question. I was like, oh, here we go. Like, this is going to happen.
Yeah. I've taking improv classes has really allowed me to let someone else lead, but find some, equal time with it. I'll be honest, if there's one thing that I could do for the rest of my life, it would be hosting. I love hosting. I love the aspect, speaking right to the camera. I love being able to bring information to people, entertain them. But what I really like to do in a hosting situation is, if there's other people, usually other people involved, right? Making them feel comfortable in that experience with me. Being on camera for some people is really hard, right? So the host or even in live situations, right? Making other people feel comfortable, making the viewers or audience feel comfortable, so that we all feel comfortable about the experience. And the ability to take an experience as it plays out, as you and I have done, and not have this scripted, rigid structure, but kind of just flow with it, and being able to be spontaneous is so liberating to me. And it also draws from, being a college professor. My favorite part of being a college professor is being able to lecture and talk to the students. Hate grading, hate test taking, hate record keeping of any kind. I hate all that. I just hate all that. That's like every job has the parts we don't like. But when I'm up there and I'm in the zone, there's something that happens where I don't have to think about what I'm going to say. It emanates from me, kind of way in which you said, like the puppet, emanates for you. Do you ever experience that flow where once you're there, you're just completely there? You don't overthink about it. You're not looking at the time. Actually, this is the first time I looked at the time. I'm like, wow, I didn't know we'd gone this long. I thought we'd been on for 10, 15 minutes. That's the flow.
Yeah, totally.
So that's the flow state for me. So what brings you, Taylor, into that flow state?
It's what brings me into that flow state. It's a choice. It's actually to really be present with somebody, with an opportunity. It's one of the reasons, like, you and I tuned in beforehand to just get a sense, right? Like with guests, I always ask people to tune in beforehand, because look, I grew up as an only child. It's really easy for me to just do my own thing, and
Sure.
and I get very carried away with that to the exclusion of others. And it's not very, and what I've noticed is it's not very fun for me either. Like there's a comfort and a security in that, but I miss a lot. And I've learned to be much more involved, to be much more present, to be much more in a situation. And for me, it's a choice, right? Like I kind of have to step into that state. And when I first started doing these podcasts, for instance, I was very nervous, right? It was like, oh, this has got to be perfect, and I've got to look like this or say this or whatever. And I had no idea really what I was doing. And I was doing in the beginning, I was doing all the editing. So I was going back and listening to myself, and it was in a way torturous, but it was also it was also quite revelatory and liberating, because it was like, oh wow, it's just conversation, right? Because I don't have an interview style. I really have a conversation style. This is really about conversations. And once again, to geek out on words, like because I originally thought that the title of this podcast was going to have something to do with conversations. It felt a little wordy and too full for me. But conversation in itself, again, to geek out on words, is to turn with somebody. So it's really a dance, right? So to converse is to turn with. So for that, I have to be here. That, every now and then there's a moment, and I kind of get lost. Like there was a moment you were speaking, and all of a sudden you stopped, and I was like, right, I don't know what to say, because actually I wasn't present for the last 30 seconds, and here's this guy speaking, and it was like, oh shit, this is on me now. But what really gets me, and it's like when I'm in here, when I'm it's really interesting and challenging in a way, right, to deal with this on screen, because like I'm much rather, obviously you're in LA, I'm in London. It's right. Difficult to do this this live and in person, but and with where we are in pandemic and everything. But I think I can't remember what the question was, but what I'm feeling is like the ability to, like, it's my flow is when I'm with the person and choosing to, because I assume, like, you came on as a guest, I know you've got an enormous amount to share, and for me it's like, ooh, how can I help bring that out, right? And that's that's a learning for me.
Yeah. Well, that is a really, so it's more than just the conversation for you, which it is for me as well. It's that being in that moment with that person, being aware when I'm not listening, being able to bring myself back to the moment. No one will ever know if I heard you or not. I do this all the time with the TV. I'm like, I just watched a 3-minute scene and I have no idea what happened, so I have to rewind, right? But I have to agree with you that in person, like being in the presence of other people, no matter what it is, a big or small or one-on-one, for me, that there's this energy that happens that, I mean, like I'm even more elevated when I'm with in person with somebody. I have learned to become more elevated as a result of necessity, right? I had to do this, but it's still like, again, I teach online 100%. So I don't get that immediate feedback that I normally would get. I can't it's kind of a monologue versus a dialogue, but I've had to be able to adjust and think about how that feels to be with people in real life, pull from that real experience and try to flow in that way. So, and the other thing, again, back on the hosting thing, is what I do also like is, being able to be challenged in a moment where you have to sometimes jump in and help things along, right? If you're like, oh, I threw this out to them and they're struggling with that, let me help them out of that. You know what I mean? In helping someone save face, like that's the role. It's not just like today it's not just informative, but it's managing the dynamics. And I love that. And I think that you do it very well through this medium.
Thank you, brother. Well, thanks for taking over hosting for the last few minutes.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. Hey, I'm always ready. It's LA. You got to be ready.
Yeah, totally. Well, as host, you can lead us out of the show. I'll hand the mantle off to you.
Well, it looks like this is the end of yet another episode, Adventures of the Self. I'm Akello. This is Taylor. I am actually starting a podcast, a little different podcast. It's coming out on March 31st, which is next week, which is my birthday as well. I like to coincide with things on my birthday because people tend to pay more attention. But I did a little something different with this podcast. Is I just could not deal with scheduling and all that. So I had a friend read through my book, and she came up with 3 really big questions for each chapter, recorded her voice. I play her voice. I answer spontaneously as if she's there. And they go for like maybe 10 to 12 minutes, short attention span when you're by yourself, right? You can only talk for so long. So that's something I'm really proud of. And that now I'm trying to think about where's my next direction going to be. That's really what I'm thinking. I've got all the podcasts already recorded, 13. I'm just going to let them schedule their way out. So it's kind of hands-off approach.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. It has been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed today.
Likewise, so have I.